Are you going to talk about unemployment today?
Why, of course, it is the one problem that really matters today. We live in a period in which politicians are not very popular. And believe me, you have my sympathy. Politicians are regarded as people who have learnt to talk but not to act. And you demand action, and rightly demand it, in dealing with unemployment. We live in a period when Britain can only survive by vigor and by action. We have resources of intellect, of energy, of craftsmanship, of skill, second to none in the world. But those resources must be mobilized for a great effort of a united nation. To do that, government and statesmen must take their courage in their hands. Well, friends, it's very good of you to turn up in such large numbers on a cold afternoon. We are now reaching the end of a great election fight. And that fight we have fought, as I claim always to fight, on reason, on principle, on arguments, and on facts. Can point to any single pledge that I have ever given and said that I broke. For a reason that, and standards and wages will go down and down until at last you have men in Parliament who will face up to the realities of the age in which we're placed today. Well, my friends, we of the war generation who have followed the old men and followed the old parties ever since we came back in 1918, who've believed in them, who've been deceived by them, like you have, we say at last that we've had enough of the old men and the old ways, and we are going to have a new movement for the new age in which we live. What's the difference between any of the old leaders? I ask you, just look at the events of the last few months. MacDonald and Baldwin, Tory and Labour leaders facing each other, supported by the great armies of Toryism and Labour, and you were cheering them on, some of you saying, good old Mac, others, go it, Stanley, fight it out, all the interests of the working class depending upon the battle. And then after all the flapping and the crowing and the two old gamecocks fighting with all of you cheering, the issues before you are this. We of the new parties stand for a constructive policy in this country. The old parties, both Tory and Labour, have stood and stand for a destructive policy. I don't ask you to judge us by what we say at election time. Anybody can come down here and make promises to the unemployed during elections. Anyone can do that, and by heavens they do it. But when they go back to Westminster, when they've got your votes from you, the same story is not told in Parliament, which has been told down here in the Pottery. And I'll tell you how I kept my pledges. I was returned at the last election, along with other Labour members, pledged to a great program to help the unemployed. I was given in that government an office for dealing with unemployment. I produced a practical program worked out in office to reconstruct industry and also to give to our people useful work on useful schemes until they could be reabsorbed in their own industry.
That the Labour Party brought in the working class and to come out to the country.
Oh.
They secured half an hour off the miners' hours. How's that?
Well, my friend,
And translating that into practice. And that's what we want done in our Labour Party. Thank you.
Right.
Here.
Apa, di atas kim na, pagkati na saya bagi sen.
Well,
That's why I resigned from it.
Hello, that's joining the Labour Party of mine. Oh, wait. Oh, the Labour Party, man. Well, I don't care what you are. Who says that? Who you are? I don't know, right? Oh, well then. Exactly. Don't want to give him all the question? Eh? Who done it? Oh, me, I'm a member of the public. I don't know, I just see what's that.
That is why.
You're from English. Oh, wait. No, that's not my stuff.
That's of the Tory party.
Well, Harvey.
Wake up, wake up. About with something?
What's your position?
You had to be careful.
That's contradicts the answer. What? Yeah, that's one question. Yeah, trying to cover it. I'll join the new party. Yeah, that's what you want to say.
No, my friend. That's all. I'll show you that the official report where I oppose the economy bill and the government of London.
I want to tell you that today I certainly am not downhearted. What I want to tell you is that within 8 months I have increased my poll by 3,000. It is just
Outside the town hall at East Islington, where the two candidates are women. Miss Caslett has won the seat for the national government. Outside the town hall at East Islington, where the two candidates are women. Mrs. Manning has retained the seat for the Labour Party. Outside the town hall at East Islington, where the two candidates are women. Mrs. Manning has retained the seat for the Labour Party. Miss Caslett is standing with the bouquet.
The total number of votes recorded, Donna, Patrick William, 14,487. Montague Frederick, 9,900. Donna, and I declare the state. And I declare the state.
Skouras, president of 20th Century Fox, brought some children from Europe to take part in the appeal. Here's Sir Oswald Mosley addressing the crowd in Hertford Road, Dalston, on May Day. A number of arrests were made, for although the Mosleyites kept outside the banned area and obtained police protection, they naturally attracted much hostility in North London. Mounted police were present in fairly large numbers, they and their horses exercising great skill and patience. The Mosley March followed, and once again it was clear that the police were in full force. With their protection, the march continued to somewhere near Holloway Jail, where Mosley had been detained under 18B during the war. In Milan, a few days earlier, what was supposed...
I came into this world on a crisp November evening in 1896, born to the rolling green of Staffordshire at Rolleston Hall, where the Mosley name carried weight and whispers of old English blood. My childhood was a tapestry of privilege, acres of land stretching out like a kingdom, the echo of hooves as I learned to ride, the scent of polished wood and leather in our ancestral home. I was the eldest son, heir to a baronetcy, and from the cradle I felt the pull of something grander than a quiet life. Eton shaped me first, its stern walls teaching me discipline, then Sandhurst, where I traded books for a soldier's stride. War called me early 1914. Barely a man, I joined the 16th Lancers, my heart pounding with the thrill of it. I flew too, in those fragile crates of wood and wire, tasting the sky until a crash smashed my leg and left me limping, a reminder of mortality I'd carry forever. The Great War ended and I stepped into Parliament at 22, youngest there, voice sharp as a blade, cutting through the stale air of Westminster. I'd married Simmy Lady Cynthia Curzon, my golden girl, radiant and clever, daughter of a viceroy, binding me to the aristocracy's heartbeat. We built a life, 3 little ones filling our home with laughter, but politics burned in me hotter than domestic bliss. I crossed the floor conservative, independent, Labor, searching for a truth no party could pin down. The 1920s rolled by, smoky rooms, endless debates, and I saw it, Britain crumbling under unemployment, coal pits silent, men hollow-eyed in breadlines. I couldn't stomach the dithering, the half-measures. I penned the Mosley Memorandum my vision, bold as brass to rebuild, to work, to thrust Britain back to greatness. They rejected it, timid fools, so I broke away, formed the new party in 31, a phoenix from their ashes. Then came Italy Mussolini's march, his fire. I met him, shook his hand, saw a nation rise from stagnation, and something clicked. Fascism wasn't a dirty word to me. It was order, strength, a surgeon's knife for a rotting empire. Back home, I raised the British Union of Fascists in 32, black shirts crisp as midnight, rallies thundering with purpose. I walked London's streets, spoke to the weary, the forgotten East End workers, farmers, soldiers like me once was, and they cheered, fists high, believing as I did we'd halt decay, forge a Britain of steel and pride. The press sneered, called me tyrant, but I saw myself a shepherd, guiding a flock lost in fog. Cable Street in 36, a clash, yes, painted ugly by my foes, but to me it was our stand against chaos, against Reds who'd strangle free thought. Jimmy's death in 33 gutted me pneumonia, stole her, left me staring at shadows, our love a wound that never healed. I found Diana later, fierce and brilliant, a Guinness girl who matched my fire, wed her in 36 under Goebbels' roof, a quiet vow amid storm clouds. War loomed again, and I roared against it. Why bleed for Poland when our own house sagged? They locked me up in 40. Holloway's damp walls, my cage, Diana beside me, yet I held my head high, unbowed, knowing my cause was just. Released in 43, I watched the world I'd warned against unfold Britain weaker, empire fading, my prophecies ignored. Post-war, I didn't slink away. I pushed for European unity, a grander dream, nations clasped as one against the creeping tide of mediocrity. My voice echoed in books, speeches, till my last breath in 1980, in France, where I'd settled. The Seine, a softer companion than Thames' grey churn. Looking back, I see a life of battles, not for hate, but for love of Britain, of order, of a future gleaming like polished boots on parade. I wasn't villain, nor saint, just a man who saw rot and dared to cut it out, who dreamed of a nation tall as its oaks, unbroken by wind.
This great meeting is gathered here tonight to hear the policy and faith of fascism. Fascism, above all, rests upon teamwork. The ability to pull together. The power to subordinate every interest of section or individual to the nation as a whole. In the lives of great nations comes a moment of decision, comes a moment of destiny. And this nation again and again in the great hours of its fate has swept aside convention, has swept aside the little men of talk and of delay, and has decided to follow men and movements. One day we go forward to action. So let who dare follow us in this hour. That is the promise of the mighty mood of Britain. We say that England is not finished. We say that England is not dead. We say, and I ask you to say with us, lift up your voices in this great meeting in the heart of England. Then go on the message, England lives and marches on.
My friends, do live in that sense that you are European. My friends, do live in that sense that you are European. That you come from people who face tremendous odds again and again. That much is against you, but you've got within you that will, that spirit above all, that faith and that belief, which will lead the generations to come. And look back at you in the pages of history with the proud words, to England, to Britain, to Europe, they were true. My friends, do live in that sense that you are European. To Britain, to Europe, to Britain, to Europe. And I claim that in the ranks of our black-shirт legions, march the mighty ghosts of England's past, and their strong arms around us, and their voices echo down the ages, saying onward. And their voices echo, down the ages, saying onward. I could not ask to live at any other moment of history than this. Because never has mankind, never has the human species been confronted with such possibilities, with such choices of disaster or of greater heights and greater glory. My friends, do live in that sense that you are European. Do live in that sense that you are European. Do remember that always. Live in that sense, I beg of you, of history and of destiny.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend our gratitude to the musicians and the dance company for your wonderful performance. This has been a wonderful evening. And not only for the music and the dancing, it has also been about us, the people gathered here. English people in the very heart of England. There are no people I would rather be among, no place I would rather be, and no time I would rather be alive. Because ever since the terrible events of October, when the money markets betrayed us all, I have known that change is coming. The human species has never faced such immense possibilities, such choices. In the lives of great nations, there are moments of destiny which have swept aside small men of convention and discovered men of the moment. And our host is such a man. For him, the little calculations of little men mean nothing. He is a man well suited to the mighty mood that England is now in. The only reason I say this now, at this moment, on this stage, is because I have some news. Good news, I think. I'm sure our host will forgive me if I use this platform, this gathering of friends and like minds, to give you, his trusted allies, an early announcement of a long overdue event. I want to tell you, good folk first, that with the dawn of a new decade, I will be setting a new course, setting up a new political movement here, in the very heart of England. And Mr. Shelby will be with me, shoulder to shoulder. It will offer a new conception of politics in which the great character of the British, our true character, will be reborn. Many of you lost fortunes in the recent stock market crash. The men of money, the capitalists in New York, the Jews, the money power, they run an international system in which the infinite mobility of money, its capacity to create financial chaos and panic, can bring down any government that dares for one moment to oppose it. For generations, the efforts of hard-working men like you have equipped our competitors against us. The cotton mills of India, the cotton mills of Asia, created with British money, but used for the destruction of Lancashire and Yorkshire. The usurers of New York, the sweated labor of the Orient, combining to destroy the iron and steel factories of Warwickshire and Staffordshire. These are policies that could not be pursued by British statesmen unless they were mad or the servants of Jewish finance. They are the ones who took your money. But it is I and those who know this truth who will light a flame the atheists cannot extinguish. The Great War have been betrayed again and again by politicians. But hear this. Those of you who fought the Jew war for nothing, you brave men, you will join hands with the angry youth of Birmingham and Manchester and London and Liverpool and declare that England lives tonight and marches on. I say all this to you now because I believe it is in places like this with people like you that we will have to pass on our message directly. Our message can be summarized with these words: Britain first. And because this is our message, I doubt it'll be reported fairly in the press. I'm afraid the newspapers of this country are owned by the same vested interests who took your money. They sell to the people false news to raise the interests of the faction and the section above the interests of the nation.
Good man.
So hear my words and pass them on to those with ears to hear. And be reminded that when the new decade begins, there will be the birth of a new political party which will speak for you. This party, this new movement, this revolution will be called the British Union of Fascists.
The men who did the street fighting, who led it, were the very flower of the English army. Men, again, as I say, wearing every medal for gallantry and drawing to them similar men.
500 police had their hands full in Trafalgar Square. The government refused to ban the Oswald Mosley meeting, so it was 99% certain there'd be a disturbance, if not a riot. Mosley and his followers claim the right of free speech, and the authorities said later that those who can't bear to listen to fascist propaganda would do better to stay away. Next time, perhaps they will. Now, only police determination protected the men on the plinth. Many in the crowd had long memories, recalling Mosley's anti-Jewish attitude before the war and his admiration for Hitler. For fascism, the British people have nothing but loathing and contempt. The 55 were arrested for resisting the police. After the battle in the square, some of the crowd marched to the Union Movement's headquarters in Vauxhall Bridge Road. This maneuver was anticipated by the police. They cordoned off the approaches to the office. Inside, Sir Oswald told the press that communists had wrecked the meeting. In the interest of free speech, he said he will hold other rallies.
But from the mid-30s onwards, there was a new and sinister political movement which attempted to use the crowd as an instrument of power. Oswald Mosley and his British Union of Fascists believed that fervent nationalism and strict military discipline were needed to pull Britain out of the Depression.
Sooner or later, in the lives of great nations, comes the moment of decision, comes the moment of destiny. And this nation again and again in the great hours of its fate has swept aside convention, has swept aside the little men of talk and of delay, and has decided to follow men and movements. Oh, say we go forward to action. Let who dare follow us in this hour. That is the permanent, the mighty mood of Britain.
Mosley's party had created a quasi-military wing of around 15,000 black shirts. They attracted strong support from a broad spectrum of society, including the middle and upper classes. The flag-waving marches of the fascists provoked a battle for the streets with one of their main enemies, the Communist Party. Support for the Communists was growing in strength in areas of high unemployment, while loyalties to established political parties were breaking down.
All we had known before we got involved with the Communist Party was the Great British Empire. And then when the Communists come along and start telling us how we could make a different kind of country where everybody's going to be equal, then we bought it. Because we thought it was great. We're going to be equal with everybody. We're never ever going to be hungry anymore. And we'd never have to have patches on our clothes and dad mending your shoes or keeping you off school because you didn't have a pair of boots. And they were going to solve all this. And here was the black shirts trying to keep us in to be servants again. So this is why we did it.
Confrontations between crowds of fascists and communists were not confined to the capital. There were, in fact, regular clashes in cities all over Britain.
Hitler and the German movement now has the opportunity to emulate that achievement.
Once they started speaking, we used to have to allow them a certain time before the fighting started, because the police used to come down and warn first that if we didn't disperse, then we would be in trouble. But of course, once you were in there, you couldn't very well get out except going down these little alleyways or going against the police at the top, and you couldn't possibly do that because there's too many of them. So you used to end up as one huge big melee in the middle, and it was a riot. Anybody in the civvies who was in between us in the black shirts were their supporters, so we used to be clobbering. Of course, we sometimes got in too quick, and we used to be clobbering each other before we knew who the hell we were. The black shirts didn't give the police a lot of trouble because they were told to keep a low key on that way. They wanted all the onus and the blame for the riots to come on us, because people like Oswald Mosley had a hell of a following, and they had a lot of powerful friends. So the black shirts were pretty protected. So we were the target. The black shirts weren't the target, we were the target.
The fascist tactics of provocative but orderly marches frequently led the police to see Mosley's opponents as the instigators of the riots that followed. The large Jewish community in London's East End became a principal target for the black shirts' anti-Semitism.
If you were a youngster brought up in the East End in the 30s, you weren't a stranger to politics because they had political meetings on every corner. There'd be the Labour Party, the Communist Party. Us kids would stand and listen. We'd also listen to the fascist meetings, and they were held on many corners too. And for a Jewish kid, they were belting out their message of hate, and we'd hear of the attacks on the Jews in the East End by them, and we learnt to hate back.
As part of their campaign of terror, the fascists planned a march through the Jewish East End on October 4th, 1936. They were faced with a community determined to defend itself.
There appeared the whitewashed signs all over the pavements, "They shall not pass." There were posters, there were leaflets, asking everybody in the East End to form what I can only describe as a human wall. You weren't asked to go and fight. You were asked to block the streets, block the roads so that the fascists couldn't get through.
This confrontation culminated in the notorious Battle of Cable Street, one of the few British riots that have been well documented.
The fascists were drawn up in Royal Mint Street, and they were being to be reviewed by Sir Oswald Mosley. And that's where they lined up, and that's where they were reviewed, but as far as they went, they never got any further. But as I continued towards Gardener's Corner, there were thousands, it was so thick there, it was very difficult to get through. But around about the early afternoon, the police started to try to clear space for them to march.
Well, at the beginning, the police just wanted to clear the roads, and they were pushing the people up onto the pavement. But there were too many of them. You couldn't possibly move so many people out of that wide road onto the pavement. They were using the mounted police, and the police were leaning down and quite indiscriminately banging everybody in the head who was within their reach. And women were falling under the horses' hooves. There was literally blood everywhere. The whole thing was absolutely petrifying.
The lack of sophistication in police tactics was vividly demonstrated both by their excessive violence and by a little-known incident of abject surrender.
Cable Street was very, very narrow at that time, and we forced open these lockups and pulled out lorries, carts and things, and made the barricades. Then the police charged the barricades, but above these stores were tenements, and the women just leaned out from there and threw everything they could lay their hands on down onto the police. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Hot water, boiling water, kitchen oil, fats, anything. And they ran into the sheds to hide. And then a lot of women came down and started banging at the shed doors and kicking at the shed doors. And finally, they came out again and surrendered with their hands in the air. Well, we were rather nonplussed. I mean, whoever ever saw a policeman surrender, and what do you do? So we took their helmets and told them to shove off.
In an atmosphere of growing police panic, beleaguered officers made token arrests.
As a policeman, he was just going to hit a woman on top of the head, and I punched him on the chin. I was then arrested, and about 12 or 14 police took me to Limmer Street Police Station. There was about 40 or 50 in a cell because there were so many arrests, they had nowhere to put them. Then about 6 o'clock, we heard the news,
that Sir Philip Game, the chief of the police at that time, had told Mosley he would not take responsibility and he would not allow Mosley to march in the East End at all. And of course, we gradually got this news and everybody shouting and cheering and banging away and all that. And it was all right, carry on.
After Cable Street, uniformed marches were outlawed. And with the defeat of fascism in 1945, it was assumed that Britain had seen the last of Mosley's rallies and the racism that went with them.
Sir Oswald Mosley, welcome to a Special Today programme. When I say welcome, you know and I know that throughout London, a great many Jewish viewers will not welcome your presence on this programme. Why should any Jewish person now watch you and listen to you?
Well, if some of them have abused me so much, they might be interested to see why. But in fact, there are many great misunderstandings in politics. Now, let us be absolutely clear about this question. I was never anti-Semitic, and I'll define anti-Semitic. By that I mean someone who attacks Jews on account of race or on account of religion. I had a quarrel, not with all Jews, but with some Jews about one subject, whether there should be a Second World War or not. Now, coming back from the First World War, after that time in the air and in the trenches and in the loss of all my friends, I was very strongly against another war. And it seemed to me, rightly or wrongly, that's a question we could debate, that certain Jews were trying to provoke a Second World War because their compatriots or co-religionists were admittedly having a very bad time in Germany. Now, I do not think that a minority in this country should pursue a policy contrary to the national interest, which can, and in fact which did, result in the loss of 50 million lives. That gave rise to a very bitter quarrel of the period, in which harsh things were said and harsh things done, because they attacked our meetings. But I was not before that, and I have not been since, or even at the time, was not anti-Semitic, because not all Jews were involved, but only some.
Sir Oswald, your answer, as you well know, begs so many questions that I have to put to you.
Which questions?
I'll come to those in a moment, but let me stay with not anti-Semitic, to refer to hecklers as the sweepings of the ghetto?
Well, the people who had just come in, they're very rough, these meetings, then shouting every insult, every abuse at the speaker, and he sees that they have just come in from Central Europe, from totally different conditions, to break up another meeting, gives them a rough answer. I might have said that to any foreigners who came in to try and break up an English meeting. Of course it was rough. People don't understand now in those great mass meetings, which some people were trying to break up. And the speaker had to hold his own, and if you saw that they'd come from another country to break up an English meeting, you gave them a rough answer.
You say that your argument with them was that you wished to prevent a Second World War.
Certainly.
Would not your arguments have been better addressed to Hitler?
The argument was not a Second World War.
Yes, to prevent a Second World War. If you wanted to have an argument with someone, would not the argument have been better addressed to Hitler rather than the Jews?
No, well, Hitler was driving east. My policy and my party was a totally different thing. Fascism in every country was a strongly national movement, therefore was totally different in its form, policy and method. I had wanted to conduct further and better a great commonwealth of nations, had to have a multiracial policy. He wanted to unite the Germans in Eastern Europe, and I did not want to intervene in a world war to stop him doing it. I thought a war between Germany and Russia was better than a war between Germany and Britain. That gave rise to the quarrel.
Sir Oswald, do you now, looking back with the hindsight and knowledge of history, blame the Jews or Hitler for the Second World War?
I blame both. I blame both in that Hitler was impatient. He wanted to drive east, unite his own people, and when we signed the guarantee with Poland...
It's rather like blaming the victim of a rapist for the rape, isn't it?
Well, no, wait a minute. Let us look at it clearly. Well, Hitler was driving east to unite his own people. We gave a guarantee to Poland, which we could only implement by a world war. In fact, we couldn't save Poland, we didn't. It's like signing a bouncing check. Well, now, the agitation to make us do those ridiculous things like guaranteeing Poland and the other side of Europe was largely due to the influence of some Jews. Therefore, I say that both were responsible. Hitler for driving east before he had got a diplomatic arrangement with us, Jews for gradually persuading us, or the British people or government, to do absurd things which were bound to result in war. All those people made tremendous mistakes. I was against both mistakes. I'm against the persecution of Jews or any other minority. I am also against giving guarantees which you cannot honor. That's what caused the World War.
When did your conversion to being against the persecution of Jews begin?
Well, because I never wanted to persecute Jews myself. I simply defended my meetings from Jewish attacks. Take the Olympia meeting. They marched 2 miles from East London. Afterwards, East London swung over to me, but at that time it was against.
What was it like?
I can tell you exactly what it was like. I went along to make a speech to an enormous audience, a record audience, filling the great Olympia Hall. People who'd marched from East London entered the hall in order to break it up. I had 1,500 stewards in the black shirt, because so they could recognize each other, that's why, in order to stop them doing it. The fighting was then very protracted. Inside my meeting, I wasn't going to break up my own meeting, they were doing that. Then the cinema lights, which were there in great force, were swung off the platform onto the audience where the fights were occurring. And some people very foolishly said that I wanted that to happen. Well, I never yet known a speaker who wanted the searchlight turned off himself and on to other people. And that was done by the cinema lights, naturally. If I then had intervened by force, asked my people to swivel the lights back onto me, what an outrage it would be. Supposing that lights were turned off me now onto something else, and I had people around me went and turned them back onto me, you'd rightly think it an outrage. And that was done by the cinema companies who wanted a story.
Sorry, it
wasn't done by me.
You've described what was happening in there. What I'm actually asking you is how you felt addressing what was by any standards a huge rally. Did you then feel that the millennium had come and that power was yours for the taking?
Oh, good heavens, no. It took me, I'd spoken all over the country. For 7 years I spoke at enormous meetings, far the greatest ever held in this country. And 3 years later after that, I addressed an audience twice as big, 4 or 5 years later, in 1939, twice as big in the exhibition hall at Earl's Court, never been filled for a meeting on any other occasion. And that meeting was absolutely orderly and immensely enthusiastic, because the attempt to break up our meetings had been defeated. Force was used against us, and we used force in return. I hate force. I had more than enough of force for fighting in Aire and Trench in the First War. But when my meetings were attacked, I either had to close down or defend them, and I organized their defense, and we won. We had orderly meetings, and that was our whole offense.
Do you really hate force, Sir Oswald, or do you not, in fact, have a hankering as a man of action for the quick result that force can achieve?
Oh, no. All that nonsense was knocked out of my generation in the First World War. I was flying against the Germans in 1914 to 1915, when the average life was 3 months. All my friends were killed. I was later in the trenches with my own regiment. My whole generation, practically my whole generation, was wiped out. And a man who's been through the First War had a real hatred of war and of violence. But then, if you found a political movement and come out of politics with a certain praise of what you've thought about and what you've done, and you try to go on talking to the same audiences you have before, and people with armed force come to break it up, what do? Blow them a kiss and say, good night, I'm retiring from politics, or say, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to defend my meetings. I stood firm and defended them.
But does violence, in fact, attract violence?
Precisely. They used violence against us, and we had to use violence in return.
No, but
I don't like it. I hate it.
But what do you have in you, however, Sir Oswald, a concept of the hero?
Of the hero?
Yes.
Well, I think that an element of the heroic is necessary to all great nations. Britain was founded, the British Empire and everything else that we have, was founded by heroism, men who went out to the far corners of the world and did heroic things. But it should be constructive heroism in the service of a great people, in the service of humanity. people who've done marvels in medicine and in science and that sort of thing, are equally heroic. It's not simply a military virtue. But I think an element of heroism is what is perhaps lacking today, but I'm convinced the British people are still capable of it, and in a great crisis can show heroic qualities, which should be evoked.
Who are your heroes?
In history? In our history, the great Chatham. They kept him out of politics, out of power, all his life. They gave him 4 years towards the end of it, and he gave them in return everything they've got. Immediately he'd performed that service, they got rid of him again. And any man of action who does anything for our people, or any people for that matter, is well advised when he's done his stuff, he's performed his great service, to go into retirement when he's done it. Chatham was one example, there are many others. In British history I also give a great part to Marlborough, the original Churchill, who was two great men, Marlborough and his descendant Winston, extreme opposite of character in every respect, and Marlborough and Chatham I would put with the two great Latins, Julius Caesar and Napoleon, and with the two great Teutons, the Hohenstaufen and the Hohenzollern Fredericks. I should give those 6 men as the examples of supreme men of action in history. And when sometimes I'm accused of having modelled myself on this man or that and all that sort of stuff, my simple reply is, well, now, if you're going in for action, study the great models. You're going to play tennis, go and study the champions at Wimbledon, study their strokes, see how they do it. And I did study all that kind of person, and it's very essential to do it. That doesn't mean you identify yourself with them. It merely means that you learn from great performers how to do certain things.
It is interesting, of course, that you could choose Chatham, who, as you say, was kept out of political life nearly all his life and then drawn back. In a shorter interview which we did recently, you gave me the impression that you still believe the call might come for you. Do you really
yes,
believe that?
I'm much better now than I've ever been in my life. I've still
Better at what, sir?
Better at politics. That is, I've got health and vigour, every capacity I ever had, and added to it a vast experience, and I hope more wisdom than I had when I was young. At least that seems to be the impression of a good many people. Therefore, while you have health and strength, you go on improving. Experience and wisdom which comes with age is a splendid thing. Of course, when you get past it all, and are physically feeble and the rest of it, then it is over, and any man of any sense recognizes it. That happily history abounds in cases of men who went on to 10 or 15 years older than I am now and did extraordinary things. Therefore I feel that my whole life has been a training for what can now come. And if I was wanted to perform any part, I don't care what, I would gladly do anything I could for this country.
But who on earth would ask you?
Well, they only ask people when it's necessary, when that man alone has the experience and the proved capacity and willpower to meet a difficult and desperate situation. Anyhow, my life has proved a certain willpower and certain capacity to endure and come through supreme difficulties, which are exactly what this nation will be faced with very shortly.
The poet Yeats said, "Why should not old men be mad? Isn't it a form of madness to believe at 78 that the country will call you?"
No, because countries have called back men much older than me, with great advantage, and things have been done in other spheres of literature, of art, of philosophy as well, by very old men. The only two questions are, does the situation require such a man? Is he still capable of doing something effective? Those are the two questions which our audience, and the British people as a whole, are perfectly capable of judging for themselves. That I have not yet seen anybody else in the present situation who can meet the crisis which is coming.
So what would your nation be like then? What would your Britain be like?
I'll tell you exactly what I should propose. I think in a crisis you should have a government drawn from the whole country. I don't mean just a coalition of parties which have failed. That will probably happen like it did with Baldwin MacDonald before.
Would it include Jews?
What?
Would it include Jews?
If they're any good, yes. I know there are certainly one or two of them who are absolutely first-rate, particularly in science and so on. Now, what I propose, a government drawn from the whole country at a certain point, from politics, the best, certainly, from business, from some of the younger trade unionists, who certainly would be available, I think, from the universities, from the fighting services, I should certainly include as well, because in a very dangerous situation you want a few members of my original profession, the professional army, because men who are trained to danger in that situation are very valuable. And such a government, elected by the people at a general election, entirely democratic in form, subject to dismissal any day by the consequent Parliament if they abused power, but given the power to act while they are there, just as the board of directors is given power to act by the shareholders and sacked if they don't do the job properly. I think that is the modern form of government, entirely democratic, combining the two essential things, the power to act with individual liberty, which must be scrupulously preserved. No suspending of Habeas Corpus Act and all those outrages from which I've suffered myself. Habeas Corpus Act, personal liberty, always there in this country till it's needed. The moments of the crisis, they scrap it and put people in jail without trial. Absolutely wrong. Give a government power to act, certainly. Dismiss it if it doesn't do the job, and preserve with cast iron
How do we dismiss it?
rules
There would still be
individual
elections.
liberty.
There would still be elections.
Oh, certainly. Exactly as today. That any party might enter the election and that the people should choose. But if they give a party or a newly constituted government or proposed government, if they give it power, that is a parliamentary majority, that majority should give it the power to act and should sack them if they don't act properly.
And we have
Unless and until the people vote for them, the question doesn't arise.
We have a substantial black and brown and coloured population in this country now. Would they be represented in your government of all talents?
They'd have a vote in every constituency.
Would they be in your government?
If any of them was a first-rate man, he certainly would be, yes.
What's a first-rate man, Sir Oswald?
First-rate man of proved capacity in any sphere. Scientists and people like that who've had nothing whatever to do with politics would certainly be included in the kind of government I suggest. The politicians would be in a minority. And if some black or some Asian had proved himself in some sphere as an outstanding man, he'd obviously be a most welcome member of any government that was formed.
If he hadn't been sent home under your repatriation schemes?
Well, repatriation, now that is, I was against, of course, and that was quite often discussed at the time, against them ever coming here. That is, I took a stand way back in 55. I fought an election on the subject in 59, the very strange and dubious election, and I stood for that policy, I think several years before Mr. Powell ever thought of such a thing while he was Minister of Health and introducing coloured nurses into the hospital service. And I was strongly against the thing from the start, when it was perfectly easy to stop it. But now that we've got anything, well, the figures are very much disputed, but anyhow, a very large number here, it's a much bigger operation to secure any repatriation. And it can only be done in a humane and a decent way. And I think that means the whole of Europe facing the problem together and enabling conditions in their homelands to which they will wish to return. I think it's possible to solve that problem in a decent and humane way, but immeasurably more difficult than it was in 1955 when I first stated publicly that immigration of that kind should be stopped.
This seems to me the thing that has bedeviled you all your life, Sir Oswald, that you put forward and advance ideas, obviously in the 30 major economic ideas that might have and probably should have been taken up. But always you're bedeviled by this desire to find a scapegoat which will rally people around you. In the 30s, the Jews, in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, the blacks. Who next?
No, well, the answer is, I think, very plain and simple. I was against certain Jews, not all Jews, because they were agitating for war. I was against the import of a completely different alien population which would bedevil our whole civilization and has done it. But that is the only form of prejudice of that kind which can ever be charged against me. For instance, as the Times reported recently in a long article, a study of that period, I stood against the persecution of the Irish, having had to fight them as a professional soldier at the end of the First War. I strongly opposed the treatment of them by the black and tans, and was praised in my early life for my humane treatment of such people. I stand against atrocity and bullying, and I still feel the same today. I am passionately against any ill treatment of prisoners or the underdog. But in those two cases, it was necessary to take action against a minority who were agitating for war, or against the import of another population in an overcrowded island, which has done us immeasurable harm. But we cannot deal with it brutally and inhumanely. We've got to deal with it if we deal on a great scale with the whole of Europe, making arrangements for a fair return of people to their native lands, and that means an enormous enterprise, because there's got to be conditions to which they wish to return.
When you say, and when you think about this call that will come, why should the call come? What is wrong with the political leaders now?
Well, I'll tell you exactly what is wrong. They're running into a supreme crisis because they've failed to solve all the main problems. Now what is the main problem? The main problem is the failure to adjust consumption to production. That is, in plain language, to give the mass of the people the power to consume the goods the mass of the people produce. Not an insoluble problem, it's a matter of creating conditions in which it can be done. Now, before the war, in my early days in politics, we had deflation, which was a disaster. And some people are proposing it again. They're dressing it up in a lot of new jargon. It's exactly the same policy we saw applied before. All this Keith Joseph, Powell stuff of deflating and the rest of it means doing what we did in the 40s, the creation of enormous unemployment. Now, in an effort to escape from that, they've had the contrary, inflation. What you want is a perfectly stable price level with production matched by consumption, and that means two things: a viable area, and within that area, a government given the power to act. Now, in old days, in my youth in politics, we had the British Commonwealth. That is a viable area. And if government had the will really to act, we could have solved the problem there. That was thrown away in the Second War. I'm greatly denounced for opposing the Second War, but it lost us everything. And after the war, I said we must go right into Europe. There's another viable area. And if you have the whole of Europe and a government capable of running the whole of Europe, central government for the main subjects, national governments at the next level exactly like we got today, and regional governments, Scotland, Wales, possibly even Yorkshire and Lancashire, a great devolution, you can solve the problem if you are insulated from the chaos of world markets and of world finance. A viable area and the power to act. Those are the two things which are necessary. Endless detail could be added, but in broad outline, that is what has to be done, and you need a government with the will to act within an area where action is possible.
Don't you understand, Sir Oswald, that what is tied to this will to act is people can see and accept the will to act, but what they are also afraid of are the consequences of the man of action.
Yes, indeed.
And they look at Europe, and they look at other countries which have chosen men of action, some of the left, some of the right, and they see where that ends. And maybe they say, our nice little muddle is rather better than what men of action give us.
You're absolutely right. You put your finger on the whole complex. And a number of intellectuals making these points very fairly the other day, I said, well, what you are saying, that any man who's any damn good is always dangerous, you see. Well, now that is the question. Is it possible to have men who are capable of great action, who are not madmen, who are sane and who are constructive? That is, you have a load of manure which has to be shifted, and you have a strong elephant capable of doing the job for you. Can you be assured that instead of doing the job, he doesn't run amok and run berserk? Now that the people have got to make up their mind about, sooner or later. In ordinary times, and I quite see why, they say no, strong people and strong action is not necessary and it is dangerous. But when things go wrong, it's a bigger risk to let the muddle go to a disaster than to have a man of action. And in those days, I think they will turn to action. I never blame the people, as some of my friends do, for not being ready to take action when the crisis is becoming perfectly obvious, when everybody in the know is aware there's a crisis, and the people are still perfectly content. Now, I say in answer to that, if I read the journals and newspapers in 4 languages, try to read books in 4 languages as well, if I travel continuously over Europe, America, and everywhere else, seeing every sort of person, far more than any other English politician has ever seen or done of that sort, I can just, working the whole time, keep abreast of events. How on earth can a chap coming out of a factory or coming out of an office, having a drink at the local on the way home, keep abreast with events? And when they say never had it so good, and when wages are going up faster than prices, how can they know what is happening? The question is when things go wrong, when they wake up, when we see England awake instead of asleep, will they or will they not then want men of action? Well, if they do want men of action, I'd have certain proposals to make to them.
Who would you have around you now if you walked into power and you were asked to form this government of men of action and men of talent? Who would you have around you?
I deliberately now have no one around me at all. In that, to be precise, in 1966, I finally severed myself from all parties, from all connections, so that I could speak in this country.
Who would be your cabinet? I mean, who would
the first step is to see why I separated myself, which was that I wanted to avoid the charge of wanting through an organized party to impose myself, or through clique, or through intrigue, or anything else. What I do is to
Another reason might be that only 2,000 odd people voted for you and not in Hill Gate, of course.
Well, the 8% of the electorate voted for me, which is more than the difference between the parties. It was a very curious election. A long story could be told about
it. It was hardly a famous victory. What I'm suggesting to you is that you have been rejected by the people when it came to polls. What you are now saying is that you would form this government all talents. What I'm trying to find out is who would you actually have in that government among our contemporary politicians and contemporary talents?
Let's deal with the 2 points. Low votes I've had, not more than 8% since the war. Perfectly true, but I could give you many examples from recent history of people polling far, far less than that, who were in power a very few years later. Because great countries, quite rightly, it's sensible, don't want drastic things to be done before it's necessary. Now, coming to your second point, which is a very sound, who would you put into a government of that sort? Well, now, you would look around you, if you would, anyone who was charged with the task, for the men who have most succeeded in their particular line of business, particularly men like scientists of all kinds, particularly men who've succeeded in business, and reasonable trade union leaders, particularly among the younger men. And in fact, in every sphere, there are outstanding people who've never been in politics who would be useful.
Sorry, can you think of a reasonable trade union leader who we might include?
Well, I expect they'd promptly be turned out of the trade union if I mentioned their names. I know among the younger men quite a lot who I would call highly reasonable and are ready for action. And in fact, I've seen trade union leaders on television with you, whom I don't think would be unreasonable in a situation of great crisis. They know when everything's easy and going relatively smoothly, they want, and it's their job, to get as much as they can for their members. But the moment things go wrong, those men will be looking for some way out. If the house is on fire, as a trade unionist, a young man said to me...
Mr. Oswald, we're in the last 2 minutes, believe it or not. Isn't it, in fact, a reflection on a political figure, on a man who is devoted to politics, that the only way he can conceive of coming to power or achieving his aims and ends is through a crisis, is through a breakdown in the system as it stands?
No, not if he's always foreseen that a crisis was inevitable. After all, it has been admitted very generously by opponents that I could have been Prime Minister in either of the two main parties. But I could not do what the country wanted done with their policies and with their personnel. Therefore, it was inevitable to act in view of the approaching crisis in a different way, which I have done. And my whole life has been a training for that crisis, which I am certain will arrive, but other people think will not.
Has your whole life not also been a failure?
Yeah, well, my life has been a failure if the premise on which I based it, a crisis, does not occur. Even then I have had some thoughts to offer to my country and the world, some of which have been accepted. But I agree with you that if I've never given a great part in action, then being a man of action, my life would have been a failure.
So if you don't get it, you've failed?
If I don't get that, in my terms, as a man of action, I should have failed.
Sir Oswald Mosley, thank you very much indeed.
It's usually best, I hope you agree, to make a clear statement of what I believe and feel, and then to ask you to put any questions you like to me, either on what I've said or on any subject that you like. So I'll begin with your permission in reading a statement. There is no mystery. Say if I go too fast, won't you? Stop me at once. There is no mystery about my visit to South Africa. I prefer to study the situation before talking when traveling. I like to keep my eyes and ears open and my mouth shut. Many politicians reverse this process. There are some impressions which may be stated at once. It is clear that your general position in South Africa is much stronger than when I was last here 5 years ago. For a country of your size, your economic situation is the best in the world. You are unique in that you have achieved a boom without a considerable inflation. Your balance of payments is secure. The first effective steps have been taken toward a settlement of your racial problems. You have also been much assisted by the now proved errors of your opponents. The wind of change has blown back upon its authors. Attempts to establish multiracial societies have resulted in the emergence of black dictatorships employing tyrannical methods which are the reverse of democracy and are opening the door to communism. You are fortified both by your own successes and by the now evident failure of opposing policies. Much discussion is possible and desirable about detail, but in general principle, I have always agreed with the separate but friendly development which you call apartheid. I realize, of course, that the problem in South Africa and in the United States is complicated because it has so long existed and economic life largely depends on cooperation between the peoples. But what is vital is that the principles of government should be clear-cut and stable. Central government must either be in white hands or in black hands. It is now clear that you cannot mix the two. In hard practice, it has proved necessary to divide Africa, south of the Sahara, between white and black governments. The white man will have no vote in black government areas, and the black man will have no vote in white government areas. The black man will live, if he wishes, in the white man's territory for the purpose of making money and having a good life, as many Englishmen now live in America without asking for voting rights. White men could live in black territory in the same way without voting rights. All should, of course, enjoy the basic human rights, personal freedom, security of property, and equality of opportunity. There remains always the most vexed problem of the moment, which can be briefly described as social intercourse. The ideal is to have two entirely separate but friendly peoples living side by side, each with their own institutions and pride in their own community. That is why it seems to me that the Bantustan policies of your government are wise experiments which are worthy of support. But as things stand, this seems by no means the end of the matter. A large black population, both industrialized and urbanized, now exists, and it cannot quickly or easily be separated from the whole economic life of the country. In this respect, your problem is almost identical with that of America. The solution is not the compulsory mixture of the two peoples in every experience of social life, which is failing in America and everywhere else. The immediate solution is rather to develop in both peoples a pride in their own community which does not desire that mixture. This is beginning to happen in America among blacks as well as whites. Among your black population are many men who have proved their ability in industry and commerce, in the most practical way of making a lot of money. There are other outstanding men who have great pride in their own people and in their own traditions. Such men can be natural leaders of the black community in a separate social development. In daily life of office and factory, the two communities can meet and mix in friendship. I would personally like to see the same meeting in matters of culture, in exchange of ideas, in sport and play, though I here speak as an outsider who seeks information. But when all this is said, clear thought must lead to one clear principle, which should be strongly stated. In public life, meeting and mixing is necessary and desirable. But in private life, every man's home is his own. To deny this is to strike at the very roots of human liberty. Included in the home are children and everything connected with them. This means, in practice, that the white people should be able to educate their children as they wish in the schools of their own community. When a full community pride is developed among the blacks, they will desire the same thing. They have a right to demand the same education, but not to demand mixed education. The compulsory mixture in America was a grave violation of private liberty. By similar principle of the inviolability of private life, each community should have the right to run its own clubs, hotels, restaurants, etc., as individual proprietors may desire. In short, economic cooperation and separate community development seem the immediate solution. In the larger question of the relations between Europe and Africa, I have long suggested that a completely united Europe should declare a Monroe Doctrine for Africa, exactly as North America did for South America. And this would forestall the communist danger. For all effective policies, a complete union of Europe remains the supreme necessity. Now that is the end of the statement, and please, on the statement or on
A fight lies before us, lies before us. A fight for action. A fight for action. A fight against the forces of drift, of despair. A fight for action. A fight for action. A fight against the forces of drift, of despair. A fight for vigor, for vitality and manhood. True democracy only begins when the will of the people is carried out.
We say at last that we've had enough of the old men and the old ways, and we are going to have a new movement for the new age in which we live. The worldwide fascist movement has made a new advance in Germany. They have reached power after polling over 17 million votes in a general election. And we believe that Britain, where our British Union of Fascists has already advanced at a record rate, will be the next country to give fascism a chance.
5,000 fascists rally to their mobilization for the much advertised march through the East End, and Sir Oswald Mosley, black shirt leader, arrives at Royal Mint Street to inspect his followers. Communists, Labourites and Jews jam the fascist route, resisting the peaceful efforts of the outnumbered police to clear the way. 6,000 police are already concentrated in the area. Others are rushed to reinforce.
We were in a fight. I should not expel every man who was fighting with Jews in the street, particularly if they attacked us with razors and other weapons. We were in a fight. That's why we wore uniform, in order to deal with men like this who broke up our meetings by organized violence. And of course I would not expel black shirts who fought Jews in the street when they were attacked by Jews. What I would expel is a man who went around saying that we should deal with all Jews in a horrible fashion, ill-treat them or bully them. Not at all. We were fighting Jews for one reason, to stop a war with Germany. We were in a fight.
In 1931, the national government was formed, and it seemed to all of us, and I think looking back at now, it seems to most people, inadequate. And when I met Oswald Mosley, there was somebody who seemed to know the answer. It struck a tremendous chord in a great number of people. Well, now, looking back, one sees that he was right, and even political opponents have said that many times since. And had one taken his advice in those days, the whole thing would have been completely different.
Fascism in Great Britain has advanced more rapidly than any other country in the world. Not because our people had to adopt fascism, not under the lash of economic necessity as in other lands, but because they desired a new free, a new and profound spiritual movement. fascism is new to Great Britain. Because it is new, it will be attacked by some and laughed at by others. Fools always laugh at what they do not understand.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are some occasions when it is good to take stock of the position, to see how far wrong we have been, or how far right we have been, see where we stand. I claim that at present we have proved right in Europe, in Africa, and in the social policies which depended on our principles in those questions. And we have been right, not because we were guided by any peculiar vision or forethought. We have been guided above all by the principle, by a belief in the underlying unity of Europe. You may have observed that nothing really happens until the old show breaks down. In Africa, another place in which our policies have been so completely and entirely justified, I won't say triumphantly, because that's not a word to use in a situation of tragedy, but have been completely justified. Nothing could be done. Nobody'd listen. Yards of nonsense were turned out until the plain truth was proved. This time, alas, very often in blood and in a horror. We stood throughout again in Africa the perfectly clear-cut principle for which we were tremendously abused with every sort of foolish and disgusting lie. It was said we wanted to persecute the blacks, that we were racialists who wanted to put our people on top of one another, of another people. All those disgusting and foolish lies were told about. We said, of course, as I always say, naturally we believe in our own race. Any man or woman worth anything believes in his own race as he believes in his own family. But because you believe in your own race or in your own family doesn't mean you want to injure other races or other families. How often have I said a father of a family should know that it's his first duty in nature to look after his own children? But that doesn't mean that he wants to hurt or to injure other children. On the contrary, you will do them any good turn that you can. And our attitude was always the same. Our first duty was to our own people, our British and European peoples. But also, in addition to that, of course, we would do what we could to help other people as well. And who doesn't want to feed the hungry? Of course we should feed the hungry and the suffering of the world. Let's talk less and let's get on with the doing of it. Let us use the European surplus for that purpose. And at the same time, we can keep a healthy agricultural population on our own land, in our own countries,
we can feed the hungry of the world, and we can defeat the policies of communism. But we pointed out the lines of policy then being pursued were bound to end in disaster. They talked of what they called multiracialism, which was simply a universal mix-up. Take humanity, put it in a bag, shake it together, and heaven knows what would come out. They wanted to get rid of what existed, all the little gray people of the world who hate the beautiful diversity of human development. They always want to get rid of the natural, the noble, and the beautiful. They wanted to get rid of it. They wanted to make all nature as gray as themselves. It was their deep instinct. We were always opposed to that. We said, no, it won't work, and it's undesirable that it should work. We can live in peace and friendship side by side in separate nations and separate developments, but we cannot have the mix-up of peoples and races who are widely different and divergent. It will lead to nothing but trouble. It will lead to nothing but trouble. This policy of mixture, what does it really mean? It doesn't mean freedom. It doesn't mean brotherhood or any of the cant and humbug which is taught. That is just the mask for some of the vilest forces on earth to exploit the peoples in the future as they have done in the past. Every one of us in this hall was old enough to see before the war. Every one of you know what happened. How the financial forces in the 30s went into these backward countries, into India within the empire, into Hong Kong, into Japan, into China, and exploited these peoples to produce cheap, sweaty goods which ruined the great industries of Britain and of Europe, which put Lancashire out of business in the cotton trade, Yorkshire out of business in the woolen trade. And these poor devils of coolies were exploited for a wage of a few shillings a week. For what purpose? To enable the City of London and Wall Street, New York, to make better profits by sweating them and helping us. That is why it was done. That was the whole purpose. And with what result? China thrown into the arms of communism. The largest population in the world simply tossed as a present to communism. Because if you treat people like that, it's the only possible result. If there's no one to save them, no one to help them, and they've simply been ground into poverty and sweating and exploitation, what can you expect except they go communist as they did? And all these countries which have been exploited, thrown and tossed aside by finance, are now becoming the victims of communism. So finance seeks fresh fields of exploitation. Where do they turn? When the old people are exhausted. When many a poor laborer has died of consumption and of other horrible diseases in their sweatshops, or when they're exhausted fields of exploitation, where do they turn now? New pastures, new forests, fresh virgin land. And then you erect a Union Jack or another flag of Europe, and under that flag, where you allow these things to happen as we have done in the past, and those poor devils that have been sweated and exploited in Africa, like the other poor devils in China, India, and Japan, a great new field for sweatshops to be opened up, so that these new industries which we're creating in Britain today will be destroyed as the old industries were. Simplified, rationalized machinery with a few white surveyors, and then the masses of cheap-colored labor torn off the land and taken into the sweatshops to work and labor and cough their guts out with tuberculosis until they too are thrown on the scrap heap of the sweatshops. Is that worthy of Britain? Is that to be the future of Europe? And is this competition to be organized within our European Brotherhood, bringing in these sweat fields in Africa into our Europe civilization so that the financial power in one European country can use it against the financial power in another? All the great financial central power of the world, now shifted from the City of London to Wall Street, New York, shall be able, on the mass of money, of wealth, and of power which it brings to it, again and again to exert its influence in politics, until, as you see today, it is childish nonsense to say that a British government rules Britain. It's It's nothing to do with British government or the British people. The government of the world is the financial government, the power of money and of money alone. We have been guided above all by the principle, by a belief in the underlying unity of Europe. As ex-servicemen of the previous war, we did not believe in the division of Europe, in the massacre without good reason of yet another generation of young Europeans being thrown against each other to fight and destroy one another in unnecessary war. And we opposed that war by all the political means open to us because we believed in the unity of Europe, and we did not believe in the division of our continent and the destruction of its young life without vital reason. I have spoken before, and I shall not repeat myself tonight, spoken of what took me into politics first, the concept of the young airmen with whom I served in the First World War, the men who on each side knew each other and loved each other in friendly competition in the days of 1914, in the early days of European flying, and were then thrown in mortal combat against each other by old men who were far away from the scene of that combat and had divided Europe in a totally unnecessary quarrel. And I described how coming back, I and others resolved these things should not occur again. These things should not occur again. Anyhow, that belongs now to past history. We followed then the resolve that these European peoples should not be rent by fratricidal war, but should come together in a great union, which should make them the greatest and most beneficent power on earth. But how on earth can you begin to do that when you're a dozen little different warring countries all fighting each other? You must have a great community organized under one government with a definite economic leadership. Europe a nation, Europe a nation. Europe a nation meant quite simply Europe with its own government, a government which would fulfill all major purposes. But it did not mean a universal mix-up, the loss of all our national characters, turning Frenchmen into Englishmen or Englishmen into Germans or Italians or anything else. Anybody who's mad enough to try to do that, of course, could not possibly succeed. You couldn't do it in hundreds of years, not in centuries, not in a millennium. And above all, we want to preserve national characters, to drive still deeper in the soil of our continent the individual roots. When you make the great tree of Europe reaching up with its branches towards the skies, the roots of the individual peoples, British, French, Germans, and the rest of it, drive still deeper into their native soil. And the only possible security we can have in the modern world of continental politics is to have a great union, a big community, within which we can preserve our national identity. Our task is to do what we are doing, and we began at Venice to bring together the best as we saw them of the Europeans, to get them to take decisions together. First great step, after that the usual trouble, the difficulty, the struggle to move forward. Always in human affairs the same story, but willpower, endurance, and above all faith and belief overcomes all. And my friends, let me say to you tonight, that now in the decisions of Britain, which have been bad in recent years, you have the greatest hindrance to the final achievement of Europe. or perhaps in that respect, rests upon you, upon all of us, than any other people. Because if tomorrow the British people decided to do these things, the news of that would go like an electric shock of awakening of hope right through Europe. Nothing matters so much as awakening our own people. We must bring Britain into this immense concern, which is going to be Europe, and it's going to save mankind. So much as awakening our own people.
The time of struggle ends.
British Union is the movement of the people of Britain. It is their answer and their challenge to the tyranny that today oppresses them. That tyranny is the money power of international finance, which commands government, parliament, and the old political parties. In the service of finance, an obsolete and decadent system is preserved both in government and industry. Government is paralyzed by a system of universal talk in which nothing can be done, in order that real power may rest elsewhere, not in the hands of those chosen by the people, but in the hands of those chosen by finance. In face of these new conditions, how can any international system maintain the British standard of life, that alone increase it to the high level that modern science makes possible and that our great people deserve? For in this modern age, science gives to us British the power to use our own great heritage of British Empire to build the greatest civilization the world has ever seen. We have the finest workers and technicians. One thing alone we lack, a market to absorb the great wealth that modern industry can produce. That market is the purchasing power of the British people. They are robbed of the power to buy British goods because their wages are dragged down by cheap slave competition from abroad. They are subject to that competition because finance draws its usury from foreign investment in the shape of cheap foreign goods. We British are denied our heritage by the power of usury, by the power of usury. So we challenge finance and the parties who have sold the people to usury. To carry out the people's will and to subordinate to the nation the vested interests who today exploit the people, we ask from the people power for the people's government. That power will be freely given by the vote of the people and can be removed by the vote of the people. But the government elected by the people must have power to act. If the people's government has not power to govern, then the money power will continue to govern. That money power has divided the British people in order that it may rule them, We have been divided by the war of party, of class, and of faction. So the British, who for 1,000 years have never been conquered by the foe without, have been subdued by the foe within. Britons who should be brothers have fought each other, and alien finance has conquered. Therefore to our brother Britons we say, unite. Britain united is invincible and irresistible, and together we will build the mightiest civilization mankind has known. The mightiest civilization mankind has known.
This great meeting is gathered here tonight to hear the policy and fate of fascism. Fascism, above all, rests upon teamwork. The ability to pull together. the power to subordinate every interest of section or individual to the nation as a whole. In the lives of great nations comes a moment of decision, comes a moment of destiny. And this nation again and again in the great hours of its fate has put aside convention, has put aside the little men of talk and of delay, and has decided to follow men and movements who say we go forward to action. Let who dare follow us in this hour. That is the permanence of mighty mood of Britain. We say that England is not finished. We say that England is not dead. We say, and I ask you to say with us, lift up your voices in this great meeting in the heart of England. Send to all the world a message. England lives and marches on.
My friends, do live in that sense that you are European. My friends, do live in that sense that you are European. That you come from people who face tremendous odds again and again. That much is against you, but you've got within you that will, that spirit above all, that faith and that belief, which will lead the generations to come to look back at you in the pages of history with the proud words, to England, to Britain, to Europe, they were true. My friends, to live in that sense that you are European.
And I claim that in the ranks of our black shirt legions march the mighty ghosts of England's past, and their strong arms around us, and their voices echo down the ages, saying onward. And our voices echo. Down the ages. Saying onward.
I could not ask to live at any other moment of history than this. Because never has mankind, never has the human species been confronted with such possibilities, with such choices of disaster or of greater heights and greater glory. My friends, do live in that sense that you are European. Do live in that sense that you are European. Do remember that always. Live in that sense, I beg of you, of history and of destiny.
I am speaking to you in the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
The war we oppose has landed Britain in the biggest mess and Europe and us all in the greatest danger our history has ever known. You can now judge the results for yourselves. I ask you whether we were wrong after all to have opposed that war. My friends, there is nothing in my life of which I am so proud as having suffered at that time for a great belief. And you may yet be glad that there are some Englishmen who are known throughout the world to have on their hands no blood from the Brothers' War.
Germany calling, Germany calling.
Germany calling.
The financiers, the vested interests, and the old parties who serve them hate our movement and use their money power to destroy us. They control, directly or indirectly, the press, the cinema, and the radio. Now, what is their case against us? And what is the truth? They attack us for our policy in the last war, when they imprisoned us without trial in order to stop our mouths. They have never been able even to suggest that we did anything against our country. We were patriots who had fought in the previous war, but we were determined to save the new generation from another unnecessary war, which would bring even greater disaster to mankind. They imprisoned us because they feared we would persuade the people to make peace. But were we not right? Are we not now proved to have been right? What good has that war done to anyone? My friends, you can begin now to serve our people, our country, and our brother Europeans. Enter the ranks of our movement and begin this great service. Our aim is Europe, a nation. Our creed is European socialism. This is the coming brotherhood of the European. All shall serve each other within that brotherhood, but none shall exploit. You have the same spirit if you belong to the best of the British. Come to our brotherhood and strive for the coming victory. The days of defeat and disaster are behind. The hard and testing days of struggle for the very life and soul of our country of Europe lie ahead. We need you. Come to us. I stretch out my hand to you, my old and my new companions. Together we will yet save the lands we love. Together we will build to the great reality, the world of which men have dreamed.
Until our sacrifice is atoned and our end is achieved. And ever since then, I've stood and fought for the union of Europe. And now we bring together in the National Party of Europe at last an achievement after years, my lifetime of labor. The best, the young, the brave, the noble, together. And I say, Europe arise. We win tomorrow. So much for the past. Let us look at the future. What do we propose for your judgment and decision?
We seek only to serve you, the people. We can do nothing without your support and enthusiasm. All the talk about dictatorship is sheer nonsense. No one can rule a great and highly educated people against their will. No one can do anything worth doing without the love of the people, which is only given to those who serve them with high ideals, wisdom, and courage. He said, Europe, a nation, was my description of what we mean. The union of the European peoples as a united nation. If we do not have true union, we shall still have national intrigues and division. It can be done, too, without war or oppression of other peoples. In our strength, we shall not attack or oppress other people. In this way, all the peoples will be free to develop their own lands and their own cultures. We shall help each other. We will therefore be friends with all, but live only in our own family, and that family is Europe. This is the coming brotherhood of the Europeans.
March the mighty ghost of England's past, and their strong arms around us, and their voices echo down the ages, saying onward.
It's one of two people speaking there. It's reminiscent either of Hitler or of Charlie Chaplin's Great Dictator. Which is it?
Sir Oswald walks to a truck to begin his talk, and the sky falls in. The Bobbies have their hands full rescuing the man who tried to make the black shirts popular in England. His dignity badly ruffled, Sir Oswald continues to his platform as the police hold back jeering crowds.
What's all that business?
Well, don't you know what that is? Don't you know what that is? Don't you know what that is? That is a salute 2,000 years before Hitler was born. all the movements of Renaissance in Europe adopted the European salute. And because we were fighting against people who gave the clenched fist salute. It was an onset of that, the onset of the Communist International, the results of which you've seen recently in the support of the old parties, and that's what we were fighting, and giving the salute of European manhood, and I'm proud of it.
A fight lies before us, lies before us. A fight for action. A fight for action. A fight against the forces of drift, of despair, A fight for action. A fight for action. A fight against the forces of drift, of despair. A fight for vigor, for vitality and manhood. True democracy only begins when the will of the people is carried out.
But in spirit I am with you always, always. My comrades, in the struggle. Our fight is for the soul of Britain, In our movement, that great character of the British has been reborn, and for that reason we carry within us the destiny of Britain. We care not whether we win tomorrow morning or at the end of a lifetime of labor and of struggle. All we care is that win we will, because Britain demands it, and no power on earth can hold down the will within us. The first quality is the power to endure. Constancy, loyalty to cause and comrade, manhood and stability of nature, These are the qualities of the true Briton and the true revolutionary. Struggles we have had and will have, blows we have taken and will again, victories we have had and will have again, yes, greater victories than even Britons have ever known. Through good and ill we march on, till victory be won, for this is the character of the true revolutionary. Together in Britain we have lit a flame that the ages shall not extinguish. Guard that sacred flame, my brother Black Church, until it illumines Britain and lights again the path of mankind.
We have believed in ourselves as Englishmen and Europeans. We have believed in our fellow Europeans. And we have believed in the destiny of Europe. My friends, it's all there. It's all waiting. Of course it can be done. It depends upon ourselves. You say? But again, we're scattered individuals. Everything's against us. Governments, money, press, television, all the new forces are used against us. All the great forces, all the material powers of the world, you say are against us. And so they are. You're quite right to feel that. And I don't underrate it, but I don't despair. And you shouldn't despair, because you, like I, have read something of history. You know something of the record and the achievement of the Europeans. And dark as this hour is, it's no darker, it's not as dark as some of the hours you've known in European history. When everything was cowardice, treachery, and betrayal. And when the Saracen hordes from far outside Europe swept right across that continent and would have come on over our own Britain too if they hadn't been stopped. And it didn't only happen once, it's happened more than once. Small bands of men came together in resolution, in absolute determination, giving themselves completely and saying Europe shall live. And stood firm and faced the menace to Europe, its values, its civilizations, the glory of its achievement, all those things in mortal danger. And they stood firm, they faced it, they came together, and more rallied to their standards, and those hordes were thrown back again and again and again. And Europe lived in triumph because the will of Europe still endured. Forces against us. Not those particular forces, but the power of money, the power of press. All those things are against us. And how can you stop? My friends, by an act of will, an act of the European will. My friends, nothing has ever been done yet in this world except by the collective action of individuals coming together in faith and belief, in will and resolution, and then making their collective action, building parties and popular movements to do it. And that's what we have to do in the modern world. Defeat communism, and we'll rouse this will of Europe to do what has to be done. Because it is the will of Europe, the will and the will alone, which is needed in everything. If the European peoples decided tomorrow to do it, they could come together, make an European government. They could sort the world out, sort the world out, sort the world out, sort the world out. What can you do, we say? Come together, get going, get working. Inspire other people like yourself, like yourself, like yourself. But if we can bring together with us enough of people like ourselves, not only in Britain, but as we are doing in other lands with other friends and comrades of ours, in other countries of Europe, and gradually that force mounts and gathers strength. My friends, today, just as much as in the past, we can meet the dark forces which in another way threaten our European life with eternal night. We can rally those forces, and in the end, we can prevail and we can triumph. It's been done before, and it can be done again, be done again, be done again. My friends, it's an immense responsibility. You're living in a historic hour. Do remember that always. Live in that sense, I beg of you, of history and of destiny. Live in that sense, I beg of you, of history and of destiny. Do live in that sense that you are European. Come together, get going, get working. Inspire other people like yourself, like yourself, like yourself, like yourself, like yourself. Inspire other people like yourself.
Lady Mosley, your family has been described as a savage tribe. Now, do you concede that title?
We may have seemed a savage tribe to outsiders, I suppose.
But not to you?
No.
Looking back at them, do you think of yourselves as a savage tribe?
I don't. I think we were a tribe.
In your book, you perplexed me because you did keep on saying you were poor.
Yeah.
Now, it was poor in comparison to the very rich, I'd imagine, wasn't it?
Of course, that's utter nonsense. We weren't poor, but we were poor compared with rich people, I'll put it like that.
But was it your father who insisted that you were poor?
Well, you see, he inherited in a rather difficult way, because I think there were immense death duties, double death duties, and so he never felt at all rich. He felt it just on the edge of being very poor. I think he imagined a lot of it.
Because you had always tons and tons of houses to go to and things like that.
So it seems, yes, I know.
Can you tell me this then? When you left your family, which was quite early, you got married when you were...
Yeah, I was 18.
18, yes. Did you run away, in a sense, from the boredom of it, or what?
I suppose so, in a way, yes.
You did, because you hinted that in your book, didn't you?
A little bit. I think I had become rather tired of it and wanted to go on my own, just as everyone does when they get to that age of 18.
And then you married Brian Guinness, and then your life in that part of your book struck me as the most amazing society glitter and glamorous life, really.
Well, I've always loved clever people, even when I was very young, and I always made a beeline for anyone I thought clever or amusing. In 1931, the national government was formed, and it seemed to all of us, and I think looking back at now, it seems to most people, inadequate. And when I met Oswald Mosley, there was somebody who seemed to know the answer. It struck a tremendous chord in a great number of people. Well, now, looking back, one sees that he was right, and even political opponents, like Richard Crossman, have said that many times since. He was one of the first people, there was a Keynesian, and had one taken his advice in those days, the whole thing would have been completely different.
But when you met him, you fell in love with him, didn't
Yes.
you? Apart from his politics.
Yes.
It was, now, to my mind, am I right? Perhaps in some ways your life had appeared so perhaps frivolous to you up until this point, because when you meet him, he's the sort of man of action and he's the man of the real world,
Yes.
isn't he?
Yes.
Do you think that was the impact he had on you, to shake you up?
Yes, it shook one up, I'm sure. But he was very, very busy with his politics. And as I think comes out in my book, I kept all my old friends and went on seeing them and went visiting them and travelled and so on.
But you were willing to divorce your husband
everything
for
was
him.
around him. You see, after
Yes.
that, I put him first in everything.
Yes, because you divorced your husband
Yes.
for him, but he was married at that time, so you knew there was no hope for you,
No,
so to
I had
speak.
no
was
idea
there?
of marrying him.
Yes, and then it was because...
I thought I should live alone and do what I could to help him, anything I could think of to do. And for some reason, I didn't mind the idea of being quite alone for the rest of my life, which is what I imagined I would be.
And then very tragically his wife died.
Exactly, and then I married
him again. Now, when you started to get interested in Germany, and in particular in Hitler, was that because Sir Oswald Mosley was the head of the British fascist movement, or was that a lot to do with the influence of your sister Unity, who seemed at that time to be mad about the politics of Germany?
Yes, she was. No, it wasn't to do with her in the beginning. It was my idea to go there. The papers were full of Germany and of what was happening. This was in 1933. He came to power in January 1933. And when I met somebody who said, "Oh, well, if you come over there, I'll introduce you to him," I was extremely interested. And
Why? Why were you interested?
I think everyone was interested.
To meet Hitler?
Oh, they were. I mean, Winston Churchill says in his book, Great Contemporaries, which was presumably written in 1934, anyway, it was published in 1935, everyone wants to know what Hitler's like. He dominated politics on the continent.
Now tell me, when you met him, what was he like?
He was a very interesting and fascinating man. As a matter of fact, see, when I went there, I thought that I should meet him in the way that you do and to say how do you do, really. But it was entirely Unity, who then became so interested in National Socialism in Germany and in him, and stayed there and met him in the way that I've described, that a friendship was struck up, which of course is a very different thing from just meeting somebody and talking to them for half an hour.
But how did he strike you? What was he like? I mean, why did you like him?
He was a fascinating man. You see, people don't get from being an out-of-work painter to being dictator of a very big, powerful, evolved country like Germany unless they've got some very special thing within them. And obviously he had it.
But you found that when you met him?
Oh, you did, at once.
What, he was charming, or what was he?
Well, he was charming, but it wasn't only that he was charming. You see, there was he was completely different from anyone we'd ever met before.
But you see, you went on, can I just be honest with you? This is where in your book, it sort of nagged me like toothache almost, to be honest with you, because in your book, you see, there's a bit in it where your husband says that Hitler, in the end, has to bear the responsibility for the 6 million Jews that were killed in cold blood, right? Now, I don't get from your book a feeling that you felt that about Hitler. You seem to find excuses for him.
I can never find excuses. It's inexcusable. All I say is that the man I knew was somebody of whom one could not have believed that first. And the other thing I say, it's not meant as an excuse, but nevertheless, it is a fact. Other dictators have killed far more people than Hitler ever killed, and people went to see them. And Winston Churchill with Stalin, for example, drinking his health, saying he's a statesman we can trust. Mr. Heath goes to see the chairman Mao, who was supposed to have killed 20 million Chinese. And they went to see them and found them charming long after they'd done their crimes and committed these crimes.
But then,
when we knew Hitler, he hadn't committed
a crime. But then when you found out that he had, what did you feel then?
I didn't believe it to begin with, because we'd been brought up very much on Lord Ponsonby's book, Atrocity in Wartime, which shows what propaganda can do in the way of inventing atrocities. But of course, by degrees, I came to believe that terrible things had happened. And yes, well, it made me very sad, as it must have everyone.
But then you don't make that clear in your book, which does fascinate me.
Well, by then it was finished. He was dead. It was over, do you see? There was nothing that could be done about it. It was just a terrible fact.
But you see, I think one of the things, you know, in your book you say that all great men commit atrocities.
I didn't say all great men commit atrocities.
Sorry, I do beg your pardon.
No, what I said was that there were others who had, and who've been visited and apparently liked after they'd done it.
Now, then, I don't like them for having committed the atrocities, whoever they are. Exactly. But I think one of the things that I suppose makes one feel very angry, in particular about Hitler, is that because he was European, he seemed so related to us in a very funny way. Do you see what I mean?
I completely see what you mean. And of course, that is what makes it seem more terrible, we'll say, than China being so far away. But I think that one can compare it with other frightful things that have happened in our continent, and I'm sorry to say are still happening. You've only got to read Solzhenitsyn to see that.
Now, both of you obviously believed in what you believed in powerfully enough for you to be put into prison, right? That was under the 18B Act, wasn't it?
Well, it's nothing to do with believing powerfully. You see, what happened at the beginning of the war was that there were speeches made by politicians of all parties saying we're fighting for freedom, for free speech, for free association, all the things that under the dictatorships don't obtain. And if one had a very strong feeling that the war was a great mistake, because you see, win or lose, my husband said, Great Britain and the Empire will lose by this war. There's no such thing as winning it. And of course that has been proved in the event. We've lost everything. We were the most powerful country in the world, and now we're just the sick man of Europe. And that really happened because of the war, no other reason. And he foresaw that. And he also foresaw that if Germany was defeated, it would bring Russia into Europe, which he thought was a disaster, and which I suppose the satellite countries probably feel has been for them a great disaster. The country for which we ostensibly went to war was Poland, and one only has to think of Poland today. It's not a very happy situation. But I think, having said that, see, he had meetings at the beginning of the war, during what was called the Phoney War, and expressed his opinion. I did nothing. I was pregnant. I was expecting a baby. The baby was born in April. The Phoney War came to an end, really, about the 10th of May. And when he saw it was coming to an end, my husband wrote and published in his paper Action a message saying, if England is invaded, there's no question what every member of the British Union would do. He'd take up arms to defend his country until the invader is thrown into the sea. Well, having said all that, and having been in favour of peace at a moment when peace could have been made with our British Empire intact, he was then arrested. And a few weeks later, I was arrested.
But you couldn't have been very surprised to be arrested, because if you are saying in a country during the war that you're in favour of the opponent, in a sense...
You're in favour of peace?
No, that you're in favour of the opponent.
We never said that. We never said that. We said we were in favour of making peace with the British Empire intact. And that would have been possible.
What was the effect of your imprisonment on you? Were you bitter? Were you disenchanted? What?
Well, bitter, did you say?
Yes.
I think I was exactly bitter. Prison is extremely disagreeable. Holloway was a very old-fashioned, condemned, I believe, criminal prison. And while we had certain advantages, because as we'd never been charged with an offence, and as we never had a trial, we had the status, as it were, of prisoners on remand, so that we could wear our own clothes and so forth. But nevertheless, it was extremely uncomfortable and very unpleasant.
What sort of made you put up with it then, as stoically as you seem to have done in your book?
Nothing else to be done, really.
Was it because you felt you were innocent?
I knew I was innocent.
And did you think that the government was wrong to put you in prison at that time?
Thought they were monstrous, yes.
Is that why you said you'd like to shoot Winston Churchill and the rest of them?
That sounds very intemperate. No, what happened was a bomb fell on the prison and the water mains were broken. And we were locked up in the most disgusting situation where all the lavatories were broken, the whole of the plumbing system didn't work anymore. It was unbelievably disgusting, the smell and the filth. And we were given a little glass of water, which was all they could do each. And you had to decide whether to drink it or wash in it. And we were all
What did you do? What did you do?
I washed. I drank a sip or two. Anyway, it just so happened that the day all this occurred, my solicitor came and I was sent for a visit, you see. And so then I said, it's unbelievable. You can't imagine how revolting it is in there. And something would have to be done, otherwise the women will all get typhus. Because, I mean, it really was dreadful. So then he said, he was a dear old boy, and he said, isn't there some member of the government you might know that I could appeal to for you? So then I burst out. I said, I know all the Tories, beginning with Churchill. The whole lot ought to be shot. But, I mean, I didn't mean to, but I was furious with them.
Winston Churchill was a cousin of yours, wasn't he?
Yes, his wife was.
And did he get to hear that you were out to shoot him, so to speak?
Apparently he knew of it, because years later somebody saw him and he said, oh, I'm afraid Diana wanted to shoot me during the war. Well, of course I didn't a bit, so I wrote him a letter saying that it was just the circumstances were so foul. I'm sure if he'd been in such circumstances, he'd have longed to shoot me. I mean, if I'd put him there.